Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody is okay from the seminar. And we have generally a couple of questions here. We still would like to have more questions, of course. But we are going to be away for, I think it's 4 weeks. And so in the meantime, if we do get some questions, we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. We'll be back October 4th. Okay. This question is from Catherine Stewart in Powell River. And she says, I heard a Buddhist phrase discussed recently, always being, always becoming. This is a very interesting phrase. By the way, there's renderings of it in almost any kind of religious background, although it's there is similarities, but not the same words. Always beginning, Catherine says, was explained that no matter what we have realized spiritually, our conditioned responses can show up, providing an opportunity to grow through them. When I heard that, I heard your teaching, she says. Says always being was described as our inert divinity. At the recent seminar, you alluded to the divine spark within us. Can you talk about always being? I've written a number of things, and I'm not going to look at them quite yet. This is a really provoking and wonderful phrase, but not always easily accepted by folks on these levels. This business of a divine spark has been often called the soul or a higher self, and often not called that. Called the Tao, but I alluded at the seminar that there were 2 levels of engagement that we have that are very finely refined and not well defined. And one of them is an inner aspect that is glowing in every being. As we become more conscious of these planes. And this is often called this soul or divine spark or some other name, or being or beingness. And this is often something that is alluded to as if we understand it. So here's a rendering. And I'll go over some of the other stuff maybe later if I can remember it or I can read it. That came to mind. Here's the rendering that I have is that as you're becoming conscious, you're becoming aware of an aspect of universality that occurs within you that gives you a thing that we actually call life. This is defined very differently all over the place. And of course, once defined by any of us, any groupings here on our plane, other groupings have to be wrong. Versus our grouping that happens to be right. This is the nature of what we tend to do. It's kind of frustrating, but it's almost laughable in a kind of a funny way. But it's sincerely defined. I'm not making fun of the rendering of a definition I'm kind of saying each and every one of us do the same blooming thing in our daily lives. So this always being is an interaction with energetic expression that is similar to a highest of all states, a universal flow. Woo. Okay, and it lies within us. And we ache to become conscious of it. You could call it, and I often have, a kind of a love, kind of a deep level of loving that relates to that universal level of loving. So that sets a mode or a mood of levels, which we as human beings constantly are alluding to in our lives. He, she is not as able as they are because blah, 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 blah. We like these levels of things. And we like to be the definer. And the person that believes without any doubt that we have the right idea about whatever we're defining. And we do this often. If you're just a little bit aware, you'll catch it in your own engagement with life. That is based on how your style has been constructed through many vulnerabilities of your own engagement with your own family and cultural backgrounds. This does not make you bad or good, it just makes you stylistic. And there are many people who are very similar to your particular style, whatever that style happens to be, ours, whatever they are. This business of always being is quite fascinating from my point of view. Within us, there is an ache to relate to loving that is commensurate with a universal loving. We can't do that very well. We do our loving based on characteristics and traits and versions of how a person should be and shouldn't be, and all the rest of the stuff that goes with it. Or how that energy in another touches us relative to our particular engagement with our stylistic personality forms. This universality that lies within us reaches out to push us in a direction that relates to loving of some kind. So you make up your mind in your stylistic background whether you're going to be a person who should be recognized as physically valuable, emotionally valuable, mentally valuable, socially valuable, spiritually valuable. And this is not the nature of a higher state. This is the nature of these states. But all along within that mix is that universality that lies within us, reaching out towards a more universal, loving aspect that exists in all life, all through the universe. I said this was my version of it. You don't have to agree with it. It's just my version. The Buddhists have a flavor about this. They recognize that that lies within us all. And they recognize also that a human being is has more of a tendency to fall in love with themselves as they engage with life and slowly move in a direction towards a hope, a wish, a desire, one could say, because it's at this level, to be in a link up with that beingness that lies without and lies within. Of course, the versions of how that might be in another individual is focused still on the personality until you can perceive it within another. This is not something that's foreign in the West. Biblical backgrounds, especially in the Christian background, has talked about this. Unless you become as a little child, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't mean as an adult you're bad. It just means if you can allow yourself to engage as if continually you're only developing, continually developing, then you can allow yourself to begin to learn how to perceive the relationship that you have with that flow of energy that engages not only within you, but without you, within the realm of all existence. That is an energy flow of a type, not understood very well by us. It's often called compassion. Buddhists do that. Others do that as well. It's called love, a divine love. A love beyond the things you like in another person that allow you to care or at least consider caring for that person. And of course, after you do care, they have to fit this kind of bill, ledger of how they have to be in relationship to that other level. There is no ledger. We have the ledger. We've constructed the ledger. Strangely enough, the ledger is focused not only on our personalized versions of what we think spirituality should be, but also it changes depending on the person. It's worth thinking about. There's no negativity in this thing. So we also have a version, really interesting, or a capacity to touch on pieces and parts of that, dependent on how, and we can sense it, we can feel it, we can feel a sense of loving, depending on our definition in here, in our minds, of what we think spirituality should look like. It's not a bad thing. It's something that sometimes helps us to feel a sense of loving. But that sense of loving is often related to an alignment process that engages with what is considered loving here on these planes. A version of, a title, for example, uh, of whatever that may be, whatever your titles you feel comfortable with. And you have an automatic reflex inside of you that garners respect until that other person crosses a couple of those ledger things, crosses them out and doesn't really comply with what you necessarily like or dislike. And that is the nature of how we are here. That is not being spiritual. That is being normal. That is being in a relationship with your stylistic way of engaging with the world. And you need that because you have to try and make sense of it somehow. So there's a lot of personalization that goes on there. After you begin to perceive energy, you still use the assessment process of the ledger. Does she comply with these? Does he comply with those? Has he done this? Has she done that? That isn't how higher states work. But it's how we tend to make sense of things. So we are always becoming or moving towards becoming a little bit more aligned with that inner spark, that divine spark, or that beingness inside of us that can allow us to recognize something or recognize how much we have done to become something. And that is quite natural. So we're not going to lose that very quickly. But here's an idea. As we move forward and begin to be aware more, we notice that there is a perception within us that may not fit our assessment process. And we'll have to make, or at least attempt to make sense of that. Because as you're aware of more energy within and around you, it will become eventually, as we are engaging with becoming, less focused on your ability to perceive it. And you'll begin to recognize energy that relates to another, even if you don't like them, that relates to a higher state. Even if they don't act the way spiritual people should act, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, whatever it may be, in the register of your defined spiritual person, that is all you have to work with until perception gets stronger. This statement is a perception statement. Always being is that defined engagement with that flow. It's always there. It helps you to see you, except that it's harder for you to allow yourself to see places that are uncomfortable for you, in you. easier to see them in other people, at least a version of them, because naturally you'll define others by how you see the world. This is very interesting. And you will be the definer. Or if you use the word in a very fractured way, the diviner. You will think that what you think is the only way to see things. The next question, I'll talk a little bit about that maybe. When you're looking at this, you'll have a tendency to hear the words that I'm using as if they're kind of not very constructive. It will be that way because it's the nature of us doing life. That's how we do things. We say, this is what she said, and this is what I think, and therefore they're not as right as I think they should be. In relating to the always beingness, that love within you enables you to say those things, even if they're inappropriate. They will feel appropriate to you because it's the nature of us. Because we love ourselves. It's just a contract thing. Now, if you're developed and given some very strong difficulty, there will be a critical aspect in that. And some people come out from past lives and they have strong critical backgrounds. And they're there. This loving aspect, this always beingness, will begin to help you to see a little bit of that. You have to please be careful not to become critical of you, because it interferes and exaggerates that which you see as something bad versus in a process of becoming. It's very interesting in the Buddhist background. You can never quite become until that flow links, either physically, emotionally, or mentally. And that's only an aspect of a link between that inner spark and that universality that is used overtly to live life for all living beings, one could say. So we use it all the time, this always being, meaning that spark is always there. If you're the most miserable person on the planet, it's always there. To, yes, help you to see that you are loving you that way. Now that's uncomfortable because your perception is broadening. Your ability to soften down, if you focus on it, and begin to understand you as a growing person, growing being helped relative to that loving manner, which is whatever you do, It's okay, but that's what you're doing. And it's all right. But are you okay with doing this, with this? As you do what you do to others or yourself, would you feel comfortable if somebody was doing that to you? You know, the old adage, which is in every religious background: walk in the shoes of another person's another person's moccasins. Oh my, this is not so easy for us, any of us, and not too easy to understand either. So I'll just take a look to see if I left anything out. Can't see it, but I will. I'll just try to read a little bit about this. And remember, just to think about it, you don't have to buy the elixir if you have responses, reactions to it. It's just something that makes some sense to me. Always becoming, always moving towards the experiential divinity that outdefines any version of beingness that we can, on these planes, allude to as being. Always being is that inner spark that we use to engage with life in a style related to our family's version and cultural version of how do we use that spark or intensity or energy unknowingly. This is a really big key. We act as we are unknowingly, not knowingly. Oh, yes, we can act knowingly as well. But our style is often unknowingly. Our strategies are often knowingly. It is often thought that as our heart opens and our minds open and our ability to perceive opens, we begin to notice the vulnerability that we have, so that we must become more assertive stylistically to maintain how our style, that we believe is exceedingly valuable, must be maintained in some way so that we don't change the stick of it. This is normal. This is how we all are. Now, you may argue with me and say, I am not like that. I have changed a lot. And you have. No doubt about it. But the issue is, that's not the goal only. The goal is softening down so you can see that spark in others as well as in you. And that's a level of compassion that is valued by the Buddhists, a level of love that might be valued by all others, perhaps, or a level of understanding that is different than the style that we've used to construct a formidable, engaging personality so that we can function here. Our spark's purpose is to meet, or self or high self or whatever you want to call it, meet within a level deeper and all-pervasive within, that is all-pervasive within the universe. What we call it, it's our business. Call it something that means something to you. At first, you will call it a special name for you, from your perspective, based on your culture, your background, or just wanting to be different than anybody else to assert your particular form. At that abstract higher level, it is non-personalized. This is the thing that really makes always being quite different than our personalizations and our versions of what we consider the right spirituality path, whatever it may be. And that means always becoming, yet always being two in one, as one. The results in a being that engages at a non-personalized level or knows the difference between the style of personal created here on these planes and the developing connection with highest of states or higher states that would be literally beyond their belief, because it's an experiential thing, remember? True to form, we see this as a journey with many levels of development. We naturally set up levels of development, as I said before, as we do on these planes. Our personality does it. Personality and our cultures do this as well, without any real knowledge of those higher states. And you can use that on any level you want to, including the spiritual. In the past, the word knowledge meant experience of higher states. A person is filled with knowledge. That means not information, but filled with that flow that has linked within her or him a oneness that is perceivable. And as that occurs, more and more interest in perceiving that begins to occur. And in the early stages of that, it can be really critical that you pay attention to your personality and the world in these planes, because your propensity will not to be not to do that. And there has to be a balance in there. Balance is vital. Otherwise, you won't be able to live on these planes very well. And many have not been able to live on these planes very well. They're not interested. They're more interested in being with that, the sensation and the experience of being in that place related to higher states. And that becomes the beginning of a different way of living life. And you live life really right there. Always being, knowing it, but also knowing that's only one platform, one place of a new beginning, a new becoming. So I think that kind of covers that question. If you have other ones about that, Catherine, don't hesitate to, or if anyone else has questions about that, please. I tried to do the best I could with that one because that one is really important. It helps those higher state beings. What they do then, they can perceive that inner state within them, that always being state within them, and they look for that in others. They don't have to look personalize it in a personalized way, because in that place, there is an engagement, one person to another, one being to another, with a recognition of where that is within them, and there's a blend with the knowing. So they are in you and you are within them. You're in them where they are in them. They are in you where you are in you. It's a strange thing. And that act of engagement, they recognize only that you know the knowing. You know the always being, at least to some degree. Whatever can happen within the version of a higher state's perception of where you can be opened more, soften more, occurs in those seconds, those minutes, those times of engaging with higher states. It's not something that they say, okay, now you're going to get zapped. That's our version of how that works. That's how we tend to see the individual as the perpetrator. On higher states, it's an engagement with that flow that can operate through that person for a purpose that relates directly to another, where they might need a little bit of help to move into another state, grudgingly, because they maintain, it is natural to want to maintain a version of the personalization exactly as it was before. So there's a kind of credibility to the personality. And that's why the business of always becoming is so significant. Beginning to be as a little child again doesn't mean becoming childish. It means becoming more open to allow oneself to soften down what it sees, because it's defensive mode or protective mode. I like that better personally. Protective modes within are on alert for all the times that you have been trained to have them on alert, which is probably close to 24/7. For these planes, kind of a interesting question. Thank you very much for that question. That's really fascinating. There's another thing that's been going on. A number of people have talked to me about what actually happens in a seminar, or not only in a seminar, but when they recognize that there's been a bump up in perception, in little flows of energy, that suddenly you become more aware. And here's the one thing that is really difficult for us on these planes. You understand that we've been talking about from time to time our need to self-protect. Think of it more like this. You're an artist, and you create a beautiful, from your perspective, picture of a form or a painting that is hard to describe. It touches you so deeply. And you can barely believe that you've actually painted this kind of a picture. This is in a few years that I spent doing some of this having some of this artistic background. Sometimes it's just fascinating. You can't even believe that you painted this thing. Of course, that's a view. And our personalities are like that. But there's something within us that we don't really perceive. Primarily our defensive modes or our protective modes. And these protective modes are valuable to us because we've had to cultivate this painting in an exact model of, stylistically speaking, of how to use, through experience, various ways of engaging with life for a purpose known or unknown to us that gives us value from our perspective, of course. And so we do this, and we try to maintain this, and we do this maintenance work. We do it very often by continually engaging the way we normally do. Nothing wrong there. If we can learn to see that, we find out we have been versed and trained to be critical. We start in a bump up to be more critical. And if you can't take your own criticism, you will criticize others. Usually it cuts back to the trainers that you've had. So look out for this. I say this for my own protection. But if I'm talking about this stuff, you may decide that I'm a bad guy because I'm trying to get you to change something. I'm not trying to get you to change something. You're misconstruing this. I'm suggesting that you will be more perceptive if you increase your perception by softening down the structure that you use to protect yourself when there's no need to protect as much as you think there is. But your experience is how you do you. Finding that out allows you to perceive more of that all-beingness. This is uncomfortable for most of us, many of us. 8 billion, I would say it's probably about close to 8 billion. That in no way means 8 billion people are naughty or bad or not doing the right thing. That's just not real. They're doing what they have set themselves up to do for a purpose that is logically valuable to them. So, slow and easy, with a tremendous amount of empathy, a person might attempt to become more perceptive by being more perceptive. Slow and easy. This opens a door, creates a blank spot, an empty spot in perception. Because if you slow down the protective aspect just a little, when it's not as necessarily needed, you perceive a subtlety that wasn't available to you before because your whole attention was on being clearly protective of that stylistic form that you created in your painting of life. None of us get this perfectly. That's why always becoming is a very important phrase in the Buddhist background. The Taoists have a view on that too. The Hindus realize that ultimately, as well as others, that higher state becomes expressive through the form that is preparing for it. That is related to always becoming. It's preparation, no negation. If a higher state knows how you are already, but just knows your focus is on a certain place, all it's trying to do is broaden out your focus so that you can handle that broadening out and not be always hurt by seeing something that you will automatically criticize because it's part of the painting that you've created. Because it wants you to love you in a way that relates to a deeper level of love within you beyond, that lies beyond the personality's versioning, yet is included in the personality's versioning. That's the always being and always loving. It just is a kind of narrowing down of love that we had to give. In my version of understanding, I believe that everyone is tremendously, has the capacity to love beyond their imagination. To forgive beyond their imagination. To recognize another's living as part of their journey and not as something negative at all. And I don't mean that in relationship to life touching in a very harsh way. I mean, I'm talking about how a person acts around other people. Because, in fact, often their actions are not noticed by them. It's just part of the rendering of a protective nature. Life is a wonderful thing. For that reason alone. And there are moments that aren't so pretty and not so comfortable. I think those things happen on these planes. None of us get away from them. Because we have cycles that we live through. And this is very difficult for us from time to time. So with that, I'd just like to remind you that when a bump up occurs, there is a short period of time sometimes when you feel uncomfortable, and sometimes you feel just lovely. But it depends on how you see them and how you argue for how you function. In any event, I wish everyone tremendous growing and great capacity to handle it in the most holy and loving a manner as possible. And that's not a joke. I think now we're going to meditate, and I believe Marlene is going to throw some music on. And I wish you all well. Please take care of yourselves. And now we'll just begin to do the balancing and the grounding. And good evening, everybody.